Good evening, everyone. I am Mustansar Siam from Pakistan, and I am very pleased to introduce Thomas Manuel, who has joined me from India to discuss his book Opium Inc. How a Global Drug Trade Funded the British Empire. Thomas Manuel is an Indian journalist, writer, author, and an award winning playwright. His words can be found in The Nib, The Wire, and The Hindu. Manuel currently works at the Indian Inc., which is a public history project. Thank you so much, Thomas Manuel, for joining me.
Thank you, Mustansar, for having me.
Welcome. My first question is, what triggered you to write this book? I mean, there are plenty of books written on British Raj and its working, but you came up with a new idea. You came up with a new perspective, and most of the previous academic work focused on China, Britain side, and the Indian side was missing.
Yeah, I think that's basically the question itself. Kind of gives the reason for why I wrote the book, which was that I'm a journalist and I used to kind of write about history, and I found that when I learned about the opium trade for the first time, and I learned about how important it was in the history of the British Empire in India, I was surprised and shocked that I had not learned this before. That it wasn't there in the textbooks. That it wasn't uh, part of like standard knowledge about this period in Indian history. Um, and yeah, there are academic works. There are many academic works on the subject, but there were very few. What can I say? Accessible, easy to read books available to non academics. So yeah, that's what I hope to do. I hope to write a book that focused on the opium trade, focused on how it's central to the British Empire in this part of the world, how it helped them become an empire in the first place, and make it so that this kind of under discussed part of our history became better known.
Exactly. Okay, what is the history and the origin of opium trade? I mean, before coming towards the East India Company and its working, and how did historically opium led to opium wars?
Yeah, so opium is a plant product, right? There is a poppy plant, and opium is the name we give to the sap that is drained from the flower of the poppy plant. And this plant has existed for thousands of years. I mean, we have been using it as a herbal remedy, as a religious ingredient in rituals and things like that. For thousands of years, different cultures have been using it. Um, its narcotic properties, in the sense, like even as a recreational like substance, it was used in India by the Mughals. There are notes about the Mughal kings taking it as well, and all of that. It was also generally used by the common people as a pain relief remedy, so that if you had a lot of physical labor, if you had say couriers who would go by foot, hundreds of kilometers, like they would take opium to kind of ease their pain and things like that. Um, and this was how opium existed prior to European presence in South India and Southeast Asia. It's really with the Dutch and the Portuguese and the British coming in that opium becomes this high value mass commodity that has strategic value and is like traded between all these countries for like other goods. Before then, it's a very low key product. It doesn't have any great uh, any great record in history. Yeah.
Okay.
And then, sorry, yeah, let me continue. So you
Yes,
wanted
yes.
me to go up to the wars. Yeah, yeah. Let me. So once the Dutch start this trade, they start taking it from India to mostly Southeast Asia, ports in Indonesia and places like that. They start that trade. They start trading with China as well. The British come in, and the British at this point in time have a very poor balance of trade with China. They have a problem where the British are importing so much tea from China that they are running out of physical silver to give in exchange. They are importing so much tea that there is no money to pay for it. And after a certain point, they're going to run out of silver completely, and they don't know what to do. And they have tried exchanging goods for tea. They have, Britain has very sophisticated manufacturing, so they try to exchange manufactured goods. But China is actually at this point just not interested in those goods, doesn't have any great demand for them, and insist on silver. So this is the problem that the British are facing. And then they realize that maybe opium could be the product that they exchange for tea. And even though it is banned in China, and it is banned because the Chinese empire already thinks of it as a problem, um, for the people as a drug. But the British realized that, even though it's banned, it's the only good that they could use in this way to exchange for tea. So they basically institute in Bengal, which is the only part of India they control at this time. This is 18th century. They start mass production of opium there, and then through private ships. They don't want to do it officially because it's banned. So through private ships, it's smuggled into China, and it becomes this. It becomes a product that generates so much demand in China that how much ever opium the British can produce, there is still even more demand for it, and this completely reverses their balance of trade problem, where now China is losing silver because they're buying so much opium, and it is a very cynical move, because it is an addictive drug, and they know the dangers of overconsumption of opium, and the British just basically don't care because they want tea that much.
Okay. My third question is linked with our discussion. How did the British Raj systematically transform Bengal and Bihar farming economies into opium producing machines? And what have been its socio-economic repercussions for the nationals of India as Britain expanded its revenue, got tea and silver, China got opium, and what this opium trade actually brought for India or Indian nationals?
Yeah, so there is a Chinese Indian historian named Tan Chung, and he basically says that he basically says that there is an opium triangle, which is that the British sell opium to China, so China get opium, the British get tea, and what India gets is colonialism.
Exactly.
And so the British are basically coming. They see they've started conquering lands in India. They have all this land in Bihar, the modern day Bihar and Bengal. And they look at it and they're like, how do we earn revenue from this land? And that's where they come up with this idea of growing opium. So they essentially do a very coercive process of convincing farmers to switch over to opium and to grow opium as much as possible. So there are a lot of farmers that move away from food or other crops towards opium, and so they set up two factories, and they set up all this infrastructure. They set up an opium department and all of that. And this starts in Bihar, Bengal, and as Britain conquers more and more of India, the amount of land that is utilized in the production of opium just grows and grows. I think at its height, maybe 500,000 acres are producing opium. Maybe 1 million farmers are involved in this production. And basically, at this scale, so much opium is being produced and so much opium is being sent to China that it is such a big source of revenue for the East India Company, right? It is at its peak, it's the third highest source of revenue behind land and salt. The land tax and the salt tax. The third highest is are the revenues from opium. So it is such an important product for them, such an important source of revenue. And again, it's a question of how can something so important not be in our history books? So and basically the outcomes of this are, it's hard to understand things like, oh, what was the effect of this 100 years later or 50 years later. But there is some studies that basically argue that the lands that were most which were completely given over to opium production, where the British saw that land as specifically something to just extract value from. They forced the farmers to grow opium, and that's all they cared about. Those are areas in like modern day Bihar and things like that. And there is some evidence for um, the lack of, because the British didn't invest in any public resources, did not build schools there, did not build irrigation channels and hospitals and things like that. Like, just because there's no interest, no public investment from the British in those areas, because they saw it as just farmland to grow opium. Like that is a part of like that has led to like that explains some of Bihar's struggle um, uh, with development, right? Like in the just like there is a history of uh, under investment in that area, and that has led to it kind of falling behind in these development areas compared to like other regions. Yeah.
Okay, one important point you mentioned in the book is that indigenous nationalist movements remained silent about the opium trade and its woes. Congress passed its first resolution in 1924 against the opium trade. Why was there was no intense agitation among the nationalist movements against this opium trade?
Yeah, that's a very good question. It's a very complicated question also because, like I said, for the East India Company, for the Company Raj, and then the British Raj, right, where the British government takes over control of uh, uh, you know India at that time. Um, there is Opium was a source of revenue. So as the nationalist movement is coming into being, as they are like developing popularity and mass support, they have to be also strategic about what issues they they agitate about, right? Like what issues should they discuss? That they're constantly talking about, like what issues should we discuss that will lead us, that will lead us to better success in negotiating with the British, lead to like more mass support and all of that. Um, so on one side, they don't bring up opium because they are scared of alienating some potential British allies back in Britain, people who might support their cause for like greater autonomy, greater devolution of power to like Indians. Like they don't want to alienate those allies. They don't want to scare them off. So they don't want to bring up opium for that reason. Um, but at the same time, they talk about alcohol a lot. There is a huge anti-alcohol agitation as a part of the national movement. M.K. Gandhi is a big figurehead of this
Exactly.
as well, and that is also because anti-alcohol agitations was a big thing in the UK as well at that time. Like there is a kind of religious led, the Christian church, many leaders are uh, talking about alcohol and trying to stop the the what they alcoholism and things like that. And in the UK, in the British society, there is an understanding that okay, agitating against alcohol is a good thing. It's like it's a moral act. So when the nationalist movement agitate against alcohol, it's a safe way to start agitating against the British, because even the British are like, we can't clamp down on this because this is a moral act or whatever. So there's a lot of pro-nationalist ideas smuggled in through the anti-alcohol agitations. So it's interesting that opium doesn't come up. And again, the reason is they don't want to alienate some people, because again, the British rely on the opium trade. So the people back in Britain, they don't want to alienate them. And also, even as they gain more power, there's the sense that like opium, if India became a free country, opium would be a source of revenue for that free independent country. So there's a lot of debate, and when some people say we should stop the opium trade, this is in the mid 19th century, late 19th century. There is like newspaper, like the opinions, the editorials will say things like, you know, like will argue that like such an act is going to bankrupt a country that is just newly forming, and they like it's a dangerous thing to do. We need all the money that we can get, So it's considered on very practical grounds. They're like, it doesn't hurt us, they're willing to uh, ignore the heavy damage that this is potentially causing in Chinese society or to Chinese citizens, uh, uh, because they don't want to um, risk any downsides to this newly independent India. Um, and yeah, eventually it happens like 1924. The Congress releases their first statement against opium, and that is again, at this point, it's again Gandhi, is convinced by people like Charles Andrew Freer and all that, to say that opium is as bad as alcohol. If you're agitating against that, you should agitate against this and things like that. Yeah.
Okay.
But by that time, the opium trade is almost over anyway. Like internationally, it is almost over. So it's a very it's a very late acknowledgement. Yeah.
Exactly. How was opium used in India during pre-colonization period? For instance, as you have already mentioned, during Mughal rule, and before it became a common drug after the East India Company turned the lands of Bihar and Bengal into opium producing machines. How it was used during a pre-colonization period in India, particularly.
So yeah, like I said, it was it was a herbal remedy. So you would find common people taking a very very small portion of it when they needed to sleep, or to if they were physical laborers, to uh, um, to ease their pain. So like I said, couriers was one. There's also uh, because its narcotic value is like known. When Mughal kings would go hunting and things like that, often if they were hunting a lion or something like that, they would feed the lion some meat which was already doused with opium to make it sleepy, to make it easier to hunt. So it has well known properties, and as a drug, yeah, the Mughal kings are very famously like using it. Like the Mughal kings are, as far as they're concerned, the richest, most powerful people in the world. So like when they're not governing, they are indulging every luxury that they can find. So they drink, they consume opium, all of that. So there is, like Jahangir was supposedly well known for that. Um, yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Okay. My last question is how this opium trade helped the East India Company to expand its revenue. How did happen to be the economic force of imperialism? Why Britain was so much obsessed with this opium trade?
Yeah. So yeah, it all goes back to tea. Britain is importing so much tea, and it is such a big source of revenue for them. At this point, it is greater than the import tax on tea in for the British state, right, is almost 10% of the revenue, which is like unheard of for like one good being so important to a country. And so they they need something to exchange with China for tea, and they come up with opium. And basically, this ability, the amount of opium that they're able to sell to China against the empire as well, like this is an important like part of it, basically allows them to turn India into a productive asset, right? Like they when they get these lands of Bihar and Bengal, they obviously these are very rich areas, and they have that. But but to conquer the rest of India, it is like war is very expensive, and uh, they like the profits from the opium trade go back into like the British like expansion. It helps them expand and conquer the rest of the country. It helps them uh, become this political like juggernaut, right? This empire that is conquering the globe in all these like various directions. It's possible because that negative situation where all the silver was pouring out into China, that negative uh, cycle is turned around, and they start becoming richer through the opium trade. So this this economic pattern basically allows them to to stabilize and succeed. Like if you think about the Dutch East India Company, like the Dutch East India Company collapses, and Dutch imperialism crumbles under its own weight, and that kind of thing could have happened to the East India Company as well. And one of the reasons it didn't is because they remained much more profitable and much more successful.
Okay. Thank you so much, Thomas Manuel, for coming on this for short book discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mustansar. I hope that was useful.
Thank you.